go ahead and get us started. So yeah, all right, recording seems to be on. Terrific. So welcome everyone. Oh, and there we go with the slides again. Going to try to have as few technical difficulties as possible this evening, but I am Lauren Cook. I am your Dean of College and Gap Year Advising here at JCHS. Excited to welcome you tonight. I want to start by just thanking you for tolerating Zoom and having an online experience. Most of this process will be done in person, but I find that having this kickoff online provides better access for everyone, so you don't have to commute into the school, and of course allows us to record it and send it out to folks who are unable to attend, like our handful of cast members that are in dress rehearsal right now. So thank you for this. We'll try and make it as scintillating as possible. And in terms of a couple of other housekeeping items up top, the default in my room is for folks to be on mute. I would ask you to just stay on mute for this early part where I'm going to give us a good amount of content. And then I'll open it up for questions about halfway through. We can try and keep those mostly in the chat box, but if folks need to unmute to clarify something, that's great. And I expect this to run about an hour. It may be less, which is great. But otherwise, we will call a hard stop at 7:30. And just know that we are, of course, not going to get through everything about college in this 1 hour tonight, but you have my full attention for the next year and a half. So what we don't get to tonight, we will certainly pick up on later. And this is being recorded for those unable to attend. Usually, Mr. McDonald is able to get it on YouTube by the end of the week, and I can send it out to everyone. We'll see with play rehearsal if that ends up being Monday, but keep an eye on your inbox if you want to watch this again. And then I finally sent out a PowerPoint overview about half an hour ago. If you don't want to follow along or reference that for later, that's fine. But I know that some folks sort of learn in different ways. Maybe you want to take notes or whatnot. So you have that if you need it. So with that, this is the official launch for the class of 2025 of your college process. So I hope you're excited. I'm excited. I'm always excited about this sort of shift in the cycle and getting to turn my attention to juniors. And this is a moment where you can really start to dream big about what might come for you after high school. And I know that some of you may be feeling like, well, I am in no way ready to not be in high school anymore, to go off to college. And that's okay. You're not going yet. This is a long-term project, right? And so this is the beginning of that. You can think about it a bit like a marathon with some markers in time that we will need to land on. Sometimes it'll be humming in the background. Sometimes it's going to be more at the forefront. But this does take a bit of runway. So we're just starting. And know that everyone's process is going to look different here, right? Each of you are your own unique human beings. You're going to have different goals and dreams, and that is great. And I want to encourage you to constantly remind yourself to keep this process grounded in what you as a student and individual want, not necessarily what your friends are talking about, what the media tells you should value, what your neighbor is doing or their advice that they have. This is your life, students, and where you might be headed after JCHS. So try and stay, rooted in that. You're not doing this alone, of course, though. You've got a whole team behind you. Your parents are on that team. You will have some faculty members on that team, especially folks that write recommendation letters for your applications. You might have some select friends you trust, getting input and maybe reading your essay or whatnot. But you're the captain of the team. You're kind of steering things, and I am, of course, your coach to help you from the sidelines. And over the next year and a half, the big picture goals, probably obvious, but we want to reflect on your time at JCHS and in high school, if you've transferred in here, what's worked, what hasn't worked, and what we can learn from those reflections in terms of your next educational home. And find some options that fit the vision that you might have for yourself next. And I do want to pull over and just note that there are lots of options post JCHS. And we do have students that access all of them. So whether that is a community college and pursuing an associate's degree or a trade degree, whether that's choosing to do a gap year, that might be in Israel, that might be somewhere else, whether you are thinking about enlisting in the IDF, that might be feeling more urgent now or more scary now. But the four-year college option is what the majority of our graduates choose to pursue. And it also, of course, happens to require the most planning and the longest runway. So that's why, that will be the specific focus this evening. But I do just want to name all of those options are out there, and we can discuss all of them in our first meeting together. And then in the spring of senior year, ideally, you're choosing between a couple of different options, and we get to figure out what's really the best fit for you. So that's the big picture. We're going to do this in bite-sized chunks, right? I don't want you thinking about the big picture all the time, or you'll make yourself crazy. But I'm here as a resource, as we want to check in on how you're doing with various parts of this. So tonight's goal is to talk about the first steps in this sort of marathon. We want to lay some good groundwork for your college search. And this is going to start with considering who you are and what you want, and then talk about some of the basics around college fit, things for you to think about, and then discuss how we're going to launch our relationship in the next couple of weeks. And then I'll open up the floor for some Q&A. And again, what we don't get to tonight, we will surely get to the next time we start talking more individually. So to start with, step one. A lot of people think step one is like jumping into colleges and talking about names and lists and all of that. I think it's jumping into you, right? So we want to think about, there are thousands of colleges in the world, but you can't begin to winnow down choices without some understanding of who you are and what you're looking for. So I really encourage students to start with what I found one of the best lists I think of is called the 5 Eyes. And this comes from a book that I recommend in the college handbook. It's called The College Conversation. It's written by a friend of mine, Jacques Steinberg, who has written the education section for the New York Times, along with Eric Furta, who's the Dean of Admission at Penn. The tone is geared a little bit more towards parents, but it is very much about starting the college search and things to think about. And the 5 Eyes are in one of the early chapters. And so I would want you to think about your identity. How do you see yourself? How do others see you? What sort of intellectual environment do you work best in? Are there values that you have, things that are important to you? How do you spend your free time? Are there certain things you can't do without? Do you need to get on a bike or in a pool or, be doing service? And then inspiration. Are there certain things you're motivated by? Does peer culture matter to you? So thinking about each of these questions, and I would encourage, in terms of practical terms, for students to try and brainstorm some answers, whether that's if you keep a journal, opening a Google Doc, and just starting to pick apart a bit about how you work best and what's important. And these are obviously not specific to colleges, right? You're making a list of attributes. So it might be small classes, that has worked well for you at JCHS. It might be wanting to have a strong Jewish community on the campus you're at. It might be rock climbing, is how you spend all your free time. And there's got to be a climbing wall or some nature nearby. But we are trying to make a little bit of a list that can become kind of a rubric by which we will figure out which schools are a good fit for you. How many of these things on your list that are important to you that school has to offer, right? So you're going to brainstorm, hopefully, some of these 5 Eyes. Think about some of the things that are important to you. And then later tonight, about 15 minutes after we log off, you are going to get a college advising questionnaire. This is not something you have to do this evening. Maybe 1 or 2 if you will. But as you think about the answers to your 5 Eyes over the next few weeks, working on your college advising questionnaire and getting that into me, which will give some of those reflections to me about the things that you are thinking about for yourself that are important to you, that you've been involved with, etc. And then we'll talk more about the questionnaire in a moment. And then some families are driven by certain majors, certain programs. Maybe a student knows they want to be pre-med or knows that they want to do sculpture. And so trying to find schools with those sort of strong departments, but other students may be feeling undecided or really unclear about what the sort of future academic or professional pathways are. So know that SCORE also has a number of career assessments in them, quizzes for you to take to just kind of think about what do I know are my strong skills? Where might I have some weaknesses? And they will come up with maybe some suggestions of whether it's majors you might want to think about, possible professions that might be a good match for you, and then, of course, the colleges that offer those pathways. So these are some ways to kind of get at that first step of who am I and what might I be looking for. All right. And then thinking about our mission here, we want to find a college that is the right fit for you. Now, I know a lot of you students have probably heard college names. Maybe where your parents went to college is important to the family. But I really want to encourage folks to not be focused on associating yourself with brands, as much as that is a human thing to do, to not be so involved with where your best friend might be thinking about or where your current crush is looking. Again, this is about sort of grounding things in what might be right for you. And I think of 4 factors of fit that you also want to think about as kind of a rubric for where you add those 5 I's. So here are some factors of fit. So again, academically, when you're looking at a college, as you've thought about what the academic options are you might be interested in, does this college offer those? Socially, are you going to have some places to get involved, some extracurriculars, some climate, culture stuff that feels comfortable for you? Can your family afford it? And we will, be getting into some finance questions as well, especially parents. This is an expensive venture. And then admission, can you get in? So these are sort of the 4 things of saying whether a college might be a good fit for you and something that we want to put on your list. So how can you figure some of this out? I will suggest a couple of research methods. I think SCORE is a great tool for you. So all of you have a SCORE account. Some of you are using it, some of you are not. That's okay. This is something we'll also talk about in our first one-on-one meeting. Make sure you're comfortable navigating it. But SCORE has some good search functions. And then, of course, you can start following schools, keeping lists. Parents, you can suggest schools for your child. And it's where we'll all kind of communicate with each other about what everybody's thinking. The College Board also has a really great search engine called Big Future. I don't love the College Board generally. They do also do the SAT, the APs, but Big Future is another one of their products. And they really can let you get kind of surgical with the search factors that you're looking for. And so they've got a lot of data in there. So I do recommend looking at that as you're searching for schools. And then I also really like the FIS Guide to Colleges. I have about 10 of these in my office that you could sign out and borrow. But if you've got, more than one student in the family, you might want to invest in your own copy. The FIS Guide has been the most popular college guide for decades. I used it in 1993 when I was looking for colleges. And part of that is because it's not written by colleges. It's not their PR machine selling schools. It is third party. It is alumni, students, faculty that fill out surveys. And while it does look enormous, there are a couple hundred colleges in here. I will say if they're in the FIS Guide, they're probably a quality institution. So this is one way to winnow down schools, but also each school only has like a 2 or 3 page write-up. So you're not like reading the whole old school phone book. But I do think it can help you get a sense of the vibe and a culture on campus without the marketing involved from the college itself. Okay, and then I am also going to suggest schools for you. So I will want you to obviously review those. And this will happen after we have our first college advising meeting. You may have some stuff in SCORE and I'm going to augment that list, or you may have nothing in SCORE and I will give you an initial list to start exploring. So that's another place where you can do some research. And then, of course, you'll want to start attending some things as we get into the spring and the summer, whether that be online kind of information sessions, actual visits to campus, or just getting on some mailing lists to hear what's happening at schools. These are all ways that you will learn about some of those factors of fit. But let's go back to that list for a second, because all of these ways of researching really get at these first 2 questions specifically, right? You'll learn a bit about academics, you'll learn a bit about social stuff. But trying to figure out if you can afford it, and more specifically, if you can get in, can be a little bit more tricky. And obviously, students vary in terms of their profile and what they bring to the table. And I do want to just pull over here for a moment and be clear that the media will have you believe that no one's getting into college. And if they do, you're going to leave with $500,000 worth of debt, right? This is all like, there's a lot of clickbaity stuff out there to prey on your hysteria over, the anxiety around the college process. But I want to be clear that the average acceptance rate for colleges in the US is 68%. So the vast majority of colleges are admitting the vast majority of applicants, all right? So everybody take a deep breath and know that it's going to be okay. You will have college options. But there are 50 to 100 some schools that have these sort of teeny tiny acceptance rates. They are outliers in the larger system. But because we're human, we focus on the outliers, right? We want to go places that might not want us. So to understand your chances of admission at these outliers, if those end up being places that you are interested in, it's important to just understand what's in a college application, right? And we will be talking about this ad nauseum over the next year, but just so you can kind of see what that list looks like. This is kind of the whole, like the longest, most broad kind of application list. Not everyone requires all of these things. So I will say, like the UCs, the CSUs, transcripts, essays, activities, that is all you are submitting to those institutions. But to private colleges, some out-of-state public institutions, they may ask for more things. You might do recommendation letters. You might have the option to do an interview, test scores, and we'll talk a bit about testing in a moment, and then expression of interest. And for those of you who read my emails this fall about colleges visiting JCHS, you might have saw my phrase demonstrated interest. There are some schools, again, not all, but some that care very much about whether or not you have interacted with them. And so again, on the one end of the spectrum, like the UCs, don't care about this. They get thousands of applications. If your first point of contact with them is your application, fine, they don't care. On the other end of the spectrum is a school like Tulane. They track methodically, meticulously, a little bit intensely if you've opened an email, if you've attended a school visit at JCHS, if you've gone to their campus. And the more of those points of contact, that demonstration of interest you have, the more seriously they will take your application, and you would receive some preference in terms of admission. So this is the complete list of things that a school might be considering. But again, depending on the school, some of these things might not be important. Know that I will support you with all of these things. And I do have the assistants, and she's in the room tonight, my lovely assistant, Dr. Leslie. Dr. Leslie has been helping this year with essay review and with some of our college visitors to campus. But testing, recommendations, interviews, college advising will support you with all of those things. And know that these are things that you really have in your control. Sometimes students talk about college admission as being sort of random, especially with those outlier schools. I don't understand why that person got in and this person didn't get in. It must be a lottery. It is very much not a lottery. That is an indication to me that they don't understand a separate conversation and a separate list of criteria that we often talk about as priorities or hooks. You might have heard a little bit about this over the summer as the Supreme Court had the ruling around removing affirmative action from a piece of the college admission process. So being a non-white student might have been a priority or a hook in the past, but there's still lots of other things on that list. So these are things that are additional criteria, often beyond your control. So this is some examples of those things that might also be considered in your application. Are you a recruited athlete? You will know if you are. Colleges will be coming after you. Are you a legacy student? Meaning, do you have a sibling on that campus or that graduated from there, or a parent? They don't care so much about great Aunt Norma or your grandpa or whatnot, but parents and siblings tend to get some priority. Being a VIP monetarily. So will your family buy a building? They do care about that. Are you a first generation student to college? Meaning, did both of your parents not attend a 4-year institution? And then there's just a whole other range of kind of school specific priorities. They might need a tuba player in the orchestra next year. They might be trying to have all 50 states on campus, and gosh, North Dakota keeps slipping through their hands, right? They might have a new data science department that they're trying to fill with new majors. So schools are usually transparent about some of this. You absolutely can ask if they have priorities, things they're looking for in next year's class. And we will in our meetings review if you have any of these sort of factors or priorities to think about with individual schools. And these help us have a better sense of if you can get in between both your application materials and any sort of priorities or hooks. And then of course, if you can pay for it, because there might be some money attached, especially to some of these things. Okay, so we've talked theoretically about doing your personal inventory, emphasizing fit when we're looking at schools. Now we're going to get into the nuts and bolts of what is happening next. So we're going to get to know each other. We're going to look at your factors of fit. We're going to make an initial list, and that will start with the questionnaires that are coming out at 7:45 tonight. So parents will get one, students will get another. It is optional for parents, but I would love to hear from you. These are required for students. And you can't sign up for that first meeting with me until you've done your questionnaire. So if you fill out your questionnaire by this weekend, my first meetings start next Monday. I will send you the sign-up list, and I have them during free box lunches, after school, all of that. And we will sit down and have one-on-one conversations about your questionnaire, about the things you're hoping for, nervous about. Just get started with all of this. I will say these questionnaires are important. I want to know from students what your experience has been like at JCHS. And I want you to be honest with me, both the pros and the cons, because that is the way we can figure out how to either replicate or fine tune, make some changes for your next educational home. Parents, I want to know if you have certain aspirations for your kids, if there's colleges that are important to you, anything contextually I should know. And this is a chance to be reflective and for me to get to know you, but this is also the beginning of your college advising recommendation letter. So I tend to need to write a letter for every single student in the class. And so if you answer one of my questions with one sentence, that is not giving me a lot in terms of my recommendation letter. If you answer with a couple of sentences or a paragraph, suddenly you're giving me more fodder to work with, right? So be thorough, be specific. All right. And so we'll have these initial college advising meetings. And this is just me and the student to start with, throughout December and throughout January. So I will work my way through the whole class. And in them, we will talk about, as I said, questionnaires. We'll look through SCORE, make sure folks are comfortable with it. We'll talk about your recent practice test results. If we haven't already, some folks are emailing me about it, and that is fine. I'll give some advice. And after that meeting, I'll make some suggestions in SCORE, usually the same day. And as I said, if you've got some colleges in there, I'm just going to round things out a little bit. But if you don't have anything, this will be your sort of initial college list. And then after that first meeting, I want you to do all that research. And if families want to sit down and have a group meeting, we can do it in person. We can do it on Zoom. We can then just start checking in with each other as need be as we get into February and March. Okay, I'm going to pause there on the big picture and drill down to testing for just a second, because I know everybody's gotten their test scores back and are eager to know what to do. Hopefully folks watched a Compass video. I wanted you to have some background because this has been the most changing, fluid piece of the process in the last few years. But if you didn't get to it, that's okay. I'm going to give you just some headlines and summary tonight. I want to say specifically to parents, the testing landscape is different from when you applied, from when I applied, even from if you have some older children, maybe when they applied to college. This is constantly, it's like sand moving under us. So know that also if I say anything that conflicts with what Compass said, take it with a grain of salt. Of course, testing companies ultimately, and I trust Compass very much, but they're going to lean into, at the end of the day, the need for you to use their services, right? They're a business. So I'm also going to try and give it to you sort of straight here. But generally, I think at this point, there is no blanket standardized testing advice for all students. Nobody has to, everybody do everything. I think it's a very prescriptive, student by student, as to whether you test and whether you do the ACT or the SAT. So some things to think about as you're thinking about whether you might test. One question is, how strong are you at standardized testing? So that's why I do encourage everyone to do these practice tests, so we at least have a little data to see if you're scoring in some higher percentiles or not. And then as we start thinking about your initial list, what might be some goals for you, certain types of colleges, do your schools require testing or prefer testing? There are a handful of test optional schools that are optional, but amongst college counselors, we have a sense that they would prefer to see scores. So I can, again, help with that advice. How selective are the schools on your list? It can be more value added for some of those outlier-y schools. And then do you have the potential to receive an elite test score? Because of course, now that we're in such a test optional landscape, the majority of students that are submitting scores are submitting high scores. And so it is sort of inflating everybody's averages. So for me to say this right now is going to panic testing companies, but I will just say testing may not be required of you. And I seriously mean that. So a third of our current seniors got off the testing bus at this point last year. Same with last year's senior class, and they had perfectly fine results. It's okay. And Compass will also say this. They track about 400 some colleges. These are some of the outliery places. Before COVID, 65% of them required testing. After COVID, which I guess is where we are we after COVID, 4% require testing, right? Huge sea change. So most places are test optional at this point. The UCs, the CSUs, and a handful of private colleges are test free. They don't want your scores. You cannot send them, all right? So what this means to me is that testing can add value when you're a strong tester. It can be value added. Not having it is kind of value neutral. Testing is a lower priority, both for colleges in terms of how they're assessing students now. So even if it's in the application, it's not holding this big weight that it used to because it's only existing in maybe half of their applications, if not fewer. It's also a lower priority for students as they're putting their applications together, and that's okay. And then, I'm forgetting my last point here because I can't see it. Very few places are requiring them. And I want to say specifically, it's not just admission, it's scholarships too. We can probably count on one hand, two hands, maybe, the places that are still requiring them for merit aid. And I'm finding it's a lot of Southern schools that aren't historically JCHS schools like Auburn, Seton Hall, Tuskegee. So you can get money too without scores. So there's no need to panic about testing and test prep. We will discuss, we will make a plan if appropriate for you. And know that even if you decide to test and you go through prep and you take the test once or twice, we may not decide to submit the scores to some schools, right? We want to make one-by-one decisions that are going to put your best foot forward. So I'll just close all of this testing ranting by saying having a plan is important. So the first part is we will talk about if you did the practice ACT, the SAT, did you do better on one or the other? Did you feel better about timing or content with one or the other? Or are we going to do no testing? And then if you do choose to take a test, it's best to try and aim for 2 sittings, I think at this point, 3 at a maximum. People do hit a testing plateau, and it's just, there are better ways to spend your time after 2 or 3 tests. So you might sign up for a May, June, July test, and then something in the late summer, early fall. You might do 2 in the spring, early summer. We call it a day. And then we want to think about how you might prepare for the test. So there's everything from free Khan Academy test prep up through some very expensive test prep. I will say Compass is on the pricier end of things, but I have lots of other companies, Revolution Prep, other organizations that do great work and can do things in a more strategic, surgical focused way. You should register for a sitting early. So I mean, in early 2024, even if you haven't started the prep yet, you kind of work backwards. You think, okay, we'll make a May date to take the test. And then, the 6 to 8 weeks beforehand, we'll schedule some prep. Sunday sittings are possible if you honor Shabbat. That's now all an online part of the process. We used to have to do mailing of things. But you do need a letter from Rabbi Rubin that's sort of stating that you're Jewish. So I provide that. So if you do want to have a Sunday test, let me know. I'll send you a PDF of that letter and you just upload it when you're registering for your test date. And then if you think you need accommodations, and you haven't had an assessment recently, you haven't been talking with Dr. Neufeld about, working with College Board or ACT. Once we know whether you're going to continue sort of pursuing the testing idea, let's make sure things are updated, that we're formally applying for those accommodations. Both testing companies have been stricter about who gets accommodations since the Varsity Blues scandal of whatever that was, 2018, where people were using the ability to have accommodations as kind of a side door for doing some fishy things. So both ACT and SAT are really putting folks through their paces to prove that you need them. So we'd want to get moving on that process in the next couple of weeks if we think that's going to apply to you. Okay, you guys, I know this is so much, so thank you for hanging in there. I'm going to now just say a few things to parents specifically. I get some questions about how you should engage in this process, what your kind of role is. So a couple of quick do's and don'ts for you all. It is so helpful, parents, if you can help manage the timeline. So thinking about deadlines, you will be CC'd on all of my emails as we talk about things that are coming up. So just also staying mindful of it. I'm happy to be the nagger in chief. I want things to be calm at home as you go through this process. But it's also good to have another set of eyes as I am managing 47 students. Thinking about the college visits. Some folks will start doing this during PASOC break. Some of you may have already started doing them. Next summer is a great time to visit schools, especially on the East Coast or places further away. You make a great travel agent. Your kids really don't know how to be travel agents. So being able to look online, just Googling, Boston University tours will take you immediately to a page where there's a calendar. You can click on dates and times. Colleges have made it very easy these days, but trying to sew together a schedule can be tricky. So it's great for parents to help with that. Registering students for testing, they will need your credit card. So helping with that is important. Investigating funding options. This is a whole other topic. I will provide a lot of resources. Hopefully you've been starting to get some of the college money method information, and we have a resource website with them. So if you can't go to some of the live video workshops, you can watch things later on, but Paul is terrific. And then I have some names of local financial planners if you want some help with paperwork and strategizing and all the rest. But know that while I can do a lot with admission, I cannot pay for college for your kids. So please look into the funding options. And then please fact check admission advice you get from your friends. If you read or hear something that feels especially alarming, please check in with me. There's so much white noise around this process about what you should be doing and when you should be doing it and are you behind and all the rest. People are trying to make money off of your anxiety and stress, right? And I can provide some good reality checks, so please utilize me. That is my job. I'm happy to do it. I will also encourage you to stay behind the white line. What are some white line violations? Please don't talk about college all the time. In the next year and a half, this might be the last year and a half you have at home with your child. So let's make it as pleasant as possible. I find that it works really well for families. If you schedule, maybe we have half an hour on Sunday nights where we check in about college, or, every other week we're going to have sort of the college check-in. But when it's not that time, please try and hold it back. And if you're really curious to know what's happening, zip me an email. I'm happy to have back channel communication so that you do not have to stress your child out by talking about it all the time. And as we get to holidays, when family members are around, they will be asking, where are people looking? Where have they got in? Where do you want to go? If you can kind of tell your brothers and sisters to knock it off, that can be really helpful for stress levels too. And then contacting colleges on your child's behalf, find a schedule the tours. Not great to be regularly sending emails to reps about, tell me about biology. What are hot topics on campus? These are really conversations that students should be starting to have and taking ownership of. I will also say, when you go to visit campuses, you don't want to be more memorable than your child. I am on a lot of campus tours where I watch some parent sort of just take up all the air time and stand next to the tour guide and ask them questions the whole time. Make room both for your student and for other students on those tours, as much as you might want answers to your questions. And then it should go without saying, but this is an issue every year. Please do not write, type, or submit applications on behalf of your child. This is a rite of passage they must go through themselves. If you feel that they are going to struggle with doing some of this, then we should talk about whether a gap year before transitioning to college and all of that might be important. Okay, so just to recap, this is our kind of to-do list. You're going to get your questionnaires and schedule a college advising appointment. We will be working on who am I, what am I looking for, testing plans, researching colleges, and attempting to enjoy junior year as we head into the winter. All right, I am going to stop there. I am going to stop sharing my screen. And I am going to look at all of your faces. Hello, thank you for being here, and look into the chat at what we've got. Okay, we've got an AI assistant, perfect. Oh, can't see slides. Were folks able to see slides the whole thing or no? Were they? Oh, yes. Okay, great. Perfect. Okay, there's a question about, should we visit schools before or after acceptance? Great question. I would say it is important to get on some college campuses before you're applying. This is also helping with that range of, what am I looking for? What's my rubric? Do they have to be places you're going to end up applying or even want to enroll? Not necessarily. I would say you could go, just book a visit at UC Davis, see what a large UC looks like. Go to Santa Clara, see what a private mid-sized suburban campus looks like. Go to USF, see what a more urban campus looks like. go to St. Mary's over in Moraga, see what a small liberal arts college looks like. These can be stand-ins for types of schools, right? And you don't have to make tremendous travel dollar commitments to just see how these feel, because big, small, liberal arts, research university, public, private, this is going to help the students start having a preference. I think about it like when I bought my first home and I didn't know what I was looking for, but as I went and saw 2 or 3 houses, I thought, oh, wood floors, really like those. Carpet, ew, that feels gross. I didn't know I felt that way about wood floor carpet until I was walking around in it, right? So you want to get a little bit of the aesthetic of a college campus. But you don't need to visit every school you're going to apply to. And of course, you won't know where you're in until really March of senior year for most students. But it is helpful if you have some base layer knowledge, because the turnaround between when you know all of your choices and when you have to make a decision can be 5 weeks, maybe. So you don't want to leave it all for April of senior year, or you will be spending a lot of money and missing a lot of school. So try and do a little dabbling, even if it's local. And then there's a question about what percentage of an acceptance class is typically had a hook or institutional priority. That is such a good question. So you're going to hear me say a lot when you get questions about colleges. It depends. So it depends. I will say students that apply to schools early decision, you see higher percentages of students admitted when they have committed to a campus early. When you apply early decision, I'm already using lingo that you might not be familiar with. Early decision is a binding type of agreement. Some of our students just committed to this, where they applied somewhere and said, if you admit me, I'm going to go. So there are higher admit rates for early decision, partially because of that commitment the student is making. But a lot of folks that have priorities and hooks also choose to apply early decision. So recruited athletes are encouraged to be in that early decision pool. A lot of legacies will go into that early decision pool because they're thinking, well, if I'm on the border, this is a really selective place. I've got a priority and now I'm committing to it. And so it's hard to kind of disaggregate what percentage of a certain admit rate is kids with hooks and priorities and what isn't. But I will say, as I am making predictions on your students' college list as we go through the search, and I will eventually next summer say if I think a school is a reach for you, a possible or a likely, I am factoring in priorities and hooks. And you will be slightly more likely to get into some places if you've got priorities or hooks. So that's the best I can say. I can't give you percentages on it, but it helps for sure. All right, more questions are coming in. And if you've got questions, feel free to put them in the chat box, either for everyone to see or just to me directly. So there's a question about if a student chooses community college with the hope of getting into a UC, what is the process for planning? And can they get any JCHS during I don't know what I mean by get any JCHS during, maybe JCHS credit during community college. So here's the situation, help, right? So I'll answer that in 2 ways. One, know that you can get JCHS help after graduation, just generally. So I am forever hearing from folks that have gone and enrolled somewhere, and after a semester, a year, they email me and say, Ms. Cook, you know what? I don't think this was the right fit. And I'm thinking about transferring. And I say, great. And we can just pick up where we left off and, think about if there were schools on the list before, should we update their writing? I've still got recommendation letters on file. Sometimes students are getting out of the IDF. They never applied to college. And so we are starting as they are first year students and putting stuff together. So know that I am accessible to you. Your tuition dollars keep paying you back after graduation. So yes, you can get that help. But if you choose to go the community college route, which is great, we have 123 really strong community colleges in California as part of the master plan. And there is something called the Transfer Admission Guarantee with 5 of the University of California campuses for community college students. You get a certain GPA, you follow the gen ed requirements of, whatever it is, humanities, little science, whatnot. You follow all of that. And then you say, Davis is where I really want to go. You are guaranteed admission to Davis if you meet those standards. And so it is affordable to spend those first 2 years at a community college. Your diploma from Davis does not have an asterisk on it that you started at College of Marin or Skyline or whatnot. You graduated from Davis. And it can be really helpful, especially in a world where admission to the UCs is really competitive right now as a whole, but specifically some of the most selective schools. For those that don't participate directly in the guarantee, and that would be like UCLA, Cal, and I think San Diego, you are given heavy preference if you're applying from a community college. And know that community college campuses also have transfer advisors on campus. So you might not need my help. They are there to help with that particular process. But it is really important to know that you have that strong option and keep it in your back pocket, because I think it's great. I was just talking at lunch today with some other professional community members who did that exact route, and it's wonderful. Question about, do conservatories allow for gap years? I'm assuming we mean like music conservatories, whatnot. It depends, again, on the school and the program. It depends on if they have a very cohort-specific policy. Some like dance conservatories might be looking to admit a very specific class of 15 dancers in this particular style. And so then when you ask for a deferral for a year, that disrupts that. And so they may not allow it, but some will. And so most are very transparent about it in their admission policies for prospective students on their websites. And we can get into that school by school. But I do have a couple of seniors now that have this, whether it's a music conservatory, dance, or art that they're thinking about. Generally with gap years, I will say that most private schools are happy to give that year deferral. You just need to give some semblance of what your plan is. Hopefully you have some kind of a plan. It doesn't have to be a program, but even saying, I'm going to do Outward Bound for a semester, and then I'm going to work for a semester. They'll be like, great, enjoy. We'll check in with you later. Public schools, it's a patchwork of whether some allow it and some don't. I will say the CSUs, the California State University System, Cal Poly, San Francisco State, those kind of places, they do not allow gap years. The UCs say they don't allow gap years, but they have some fine print where if it's for religious or military reasons, you can go. And so they have let all of our kids that want to go to Israel, whether they're doing yeshiva or doing like a high-tech internship. So they interpret Israel as religious, and we let them. So know that you have some options there in terms of the in-state schools. Another question on SCORE, they show statistics on the percentage of the schools on financial aid. Yes. How much of a factor is financial aid? How do you factor in how much financial aid is being given? Yeah. So I'm going to back up from this question a little bit and say, just name early on that this is probably the largest investment that most families are going to make applying to college. And it is the most maddening because you typically do not know what you're going to be charged until you receive an offer of admission. You will see a lot of ticket prices for colleges, and few of you will be asked to pay that full ticket price at every school you're going to. Some of you may be applying for need-based aid, and you will have a little bit more transparency when you fill out the FAFSA form, the Free Federal Student Aid form, about what the federal government thinks you need. And then schools do all sorts of crazy stuff with merit aid and scholarships. And so you might get nothing from a school where you thought you might be qualifying for some merit aid. You might suddenly find $30,000 a year in the package that you were not expecting at all, and everything in between. And so some of what's in SCORE, they do want you to put in some basics about your own financials, because right now there's some defaults in there. That's probably what's coming up. If you put in some of your own financials, it'll be a little bit more accurate, like what your annual household income is, about what the average someone in your income band might be offered or be asked to pay at an individual college. But you're really not going to know for sure, because really the merit aid, the scholarship policies kind of change with colleges from year to year. So it's another thing I'll be able to talk to each individual student about. This is based on your GPA, your curriculum, your leadership, how involved you are, all of that. And then the types of schools you're thinking about. I know from history, of course, what's been offered to a student of your profile. So we can make some guesstimates about what I think you can afford, what I think the financial aid is going to be. But again, we don't really know until we hit March. But it is very important. Go to those college money method workshops with Paul. This is new this year that we've got some pretty regular advice from him. And he will be able to help you navigate some of these more granular questions. Question about how do we find out about gap year programs? Yeah, so typically we would be having more gap year visitors at this time of year. A lot of them Israel programs. Most of them had canceled, obviously, with the disruptions that have been happening. Folks are just starting to circle back around and start to schedule some things for January and February. We do typically have a couple of other more broad international programs like Rustic Pathways, where there be dragons coming. And I think both of those have booked visits in the next few weeks. They're on the college advising calendar. I will push out some things to students. So those folks come in during lunchtime and have a table in the commons. Sometimes they also do a little spiel during Hakel. We just had Aardvark with us, which is the biggest gap year program in Israel. It sort of doesn't have any particular denominational affiliation. But there are gap year fairs. There are gap year books that are resources. So I've got a lot of those resources. I will start sending out some links and things. Know that in the handbook, there are 2 pages on gap years, and I'm going to send out a link to the handbook again tonight, both of some very popular Israeli programs and some very popular sort of general programs that might be both international and within the country. And then we can start talking in more detail about what your particular family is thinking about from there. So, question about, do I have advice about how to take into account the potential of anti-Semitism on college campuses? Great, very timely question. Talked to a Wall Street Journal reporter today about this. I've been getting a lot of media phone calls about how are we advising students on all of this. So I sent out some links for folks to look at whenever that was, a week or 2 ago. There are some websites where you can kind of track incidents on college campuses. It's a little disheartening and sometimes overwhelming to look at. I think that we have to both hold that college campuses can be a microcosm of the world. And so things are going to happen that you might be uncomfortable with. But judging whether it might be a good home for you is really around how the administration reacts, or if they react. And so taking note of those sort of things, statements from presidents and whatnot. I will say, with our day of learning next week, and hopefully you had a chance to look at Rabbi Rubin's email that I think went out earlier tonight. We have a day of learning next Tuesday on Israel. There are a number of sessions for students, including some specific ones on anti-Semitism on college campuses. And I think one might be sort of required that seniors are going to go to during lunch, but things will be open for juniors as well. So this is an ongoing, forever conversation, but obviously a specific hot button moment at this point in time. And so as we talk about specific schools, I can give you what I know, contacts on campus, and if we've got JCHS students there, can put you in touch with them. For example, everybody was worried about Columbia. There's a lot of stuff in the media. One of the current seniors is looking at a joint program there. Called up one of our current students who's doing JTS, Columbia, the dual degree at the Jewish Theological Seminary. She put him on speakerphone and he just started yelling, "It's great. I love it. Everyone's Jewish. No problem." So I think it depends. It depends on who you're talking to and what their perspective is and what the different experiences are. So long answer, short question. Okay, we've got so many more questions and I want to be mindful of time. Let's see, applying for financial aid, does that impact admission? Great question. Yes, at some places. You will see the term need blind at a handful of institutions, meaning that they do not take into consideration any financial need when they are reviewing your application. That is a lot of those outliery schools. It is places like the Ivies that have billion-dollar endowments and can afford to be need blind. Most institutions are going to have what they call a need-sensitive policy. And so when you are above the bar, sort of academically, extracurricularly, that sort of thing, then, the ability to pay isn't typically going to play a role. But I think for those students who kind of fall on the borderline, who are a little off profile for that school or just squeaking into the profile, that's when they might see your ability to pay or not as a factor in whether you'll be admitted. And I do have a sense, because over the years, I have conversations with college reps. I appreciate the places that are transparent with me, where when someone doesn't get in and I'm confused about why, they will say to me very bluntly, "We are need sensitive and this student just needed too much aid." So I will be able to, I filter all of this as I make my initial college list recommendations to you, and the percent of aid you might be on at JCHS or not, so that I'm not recommending things that are going to be out of the realm of possibility for you, right? Is there a way to view my current GPA? What a great straightforward question. Right now it's not in score, but I can, if you email me, I can tell you what it is. Not going to mean a whole lot at this point because we're on the year-long grading system. Your formal transcript that we send to colleges has a freshman year GPA, a sophomore year GPA, and a cumulative of the two. What we send off to colleges will have junior year in there and that cumulative of ninth through junior year, right? So that's the GPA that matters. And by June, when you have that new GPA, Ms. Bregman will put it into score. So you'll be able to access both a weighted and an unweighted version of that. Senior year grades do not affect that cumulative GPA because, again, it's a year-long system, but we do send some of the grade reports to colleges as necessary so they can kind of see what the progress is. It's just not formal and affecting that big GPA. But if you are curious about what your record looks like at this point, let me know. I'm happy to just send you a PDF of what your current transcript looks like. There's a question about, just saying that Young Judea is the largest gap year program. Yeah, they're neck and neck with Aardvark, but last time I saw Aardvark had a slight edge on them. But I will say Aardvark are Young Judea graduates. So in some ways, they're just like the children of Young Judea. So there it is. But Young Judea Year Course is another very popular gap program, and they are coming to visit in January. I think they just booked a visit with us, or maybe even the end of December. Okay, another question on if a student decides to do something of their own choice that is academic, how does that work? Great question. So this can be all sorts of things. I'm going to extrapolate what I think you mean by this. But sometimes students advance in math, take a geometry class over the summer through BYU. Terrific. We send that transcript off to colleges. There are places for you to enter that into your colleges. Sometimes on a year when we haven't offered psychology, a student says senior year, God, I just want to take psychology. They can take it through BYU or Johns Hopkins or UC Scout. There's lots of online programs. Again, it doesn't get noted on your JCHS transcript, but we send that transcript, additional transcript off to colleges you noted on your applications. Maybe you're choosing to pursue your own research. We've had some students doing that. We've had some students serving as research assistants. Sometimes we have students taking high-level independent art classes. There are places to put those on your activities, to put on your applications, to write about them, to list them in your activities lists. So we will want to sort of scrape everything you've done and get those in your applications as much as possible. So if you haven't started a list of some of the things you've been involved in outside of your formal classes at JCHS, club block, PE, community service, things that aren't required, get going on that list because it will be very helpful to then fill out applications in the fall. And then, I've had mention of MACA, which is Mothers Against College Anti-Semitism. That is a group that can be helpful for you as you're trying to assess climates on various college campuses. Okay, it's 7:23. The chat just got real silent. So I'll just ask, I know we've been at this for almost an hour. Are there any other burning questions? And as I say that, I will also say, students, I am excited to get your questionnaires and start meeting with folks next week for those early submitters. And we can do a lot more one-on-one. And parents, know that as we get into after winter break into the new year, I do coffees with Miss Cook once a month for an hour on Zoom from 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. So we'll have one in January, one in February, one in March. I will be sending the dates out for those soon for you to just scratch on your calendar. And you can show up with coffee, with water, with something in a mug. We don't have to know what it is. And I will give a little content at the top of each of those about some pertinent things that should be happening at that moment in time, but most of it is just for your questions. And we will record them and send them out. So if you are driving carpool to school that day and you miss it, I will send it out to you. But know that there will be a couple of different open forums as we get into the late winter and spring to just do a brain dump on questions. So, yeah. I've got to thank you. Amazing. You're welcome. I love my job and all of you. Okay. And then we have a question about what's the decision criteria? How do you decide whether to do a gap year? So many options. I think gap years, for some students, it's about connecting with the state of Israel. And that is important and formative. For some students, it's about having a moment of independence, and that is not about the pressures of writing paper and taking tests. For some students, It's, really continuing to work on executive functioning and being an adult and letting that brainstem grow and get a little bit more mature and perhaps focused, so that when they arrive on a college campus, which is very expensive, they're making the most of those tuition dollars and that they have a little bit more focus. I will say uniformly, colleges that allow for gap years rave about the students that arrive on campus after their gap years: more mature, more independent, more focused, better able to take advantage of everything offered to them. So I think colleges love gap year students. And I spent a week in Israel in February, going to 14 different GAP programs and 5 different college campuses that also have some GAP programs on them, and was just blown away by the range of options just in Israel. And then, of course, you've got the whole world to think about between internships and service opportunities, continuing to learn, doing outdoor adventures, travel. There is just so many things that you can do with that time. And it's a moment to get off the treadmill, right? You've spent 12 years in the school system in the US, and get off the hamster wheel for a moment and figure out, do I really like biology? Or was it the one thing on the menu that was most palatable to me? And there's this whole other menu of life that I'm excited about. So we'll talk, and there's some questions on the questionnaire about, are you thinking about a gap year and whatnot? Everybody gets my 60-second sales pitch on it, whether they're interested or not. So yeah. Okay, lots more thank yous. And I will just say, yes, lots of gap year programs do help defray the cost of the gap year, and places like the Federation, JFCS. If you especially want to go to Israel, they will help you pay for that. But much like college financial aid options, you can do some financial paperwork with gap year programs and have the cost defrayed. Okay, so we're going to leave it there. A recording of this will come out in the next few days. In 20 minutes, you'll get your questionnaires. Go forth and be verbose and tell me all about what you want for yourself, or ignore it for a few weeks and I'll send you some reminders, and you'll need to have it done by the end of winter break. That's sort of the hard deadline. And I'm so excited to get to know all of you that I don't know already. And I know we've got some repeat offenders in the room as well. So I'm excited to work with the younger children when I've worked with the older children too. So have a good night, everyone. Thank you so much.